Hello everyone, myself Falguni. Welcome to our channel. Students, before we start our session, first of all, congratulations to all of you that you have scored very good percentage in 10th standard. And let's start our new journey with our first lesson, and our writer is Khuswant Singh. Khuswant Singh was an Indian author, lawyer, diplomat, journalist and politician. Now here word is diplomat. Diplomat यानी कि government leader. Khuswant Singh was born on 2nd February 1915 in Punjab. Right now this area is in Pakistan. Died on 20th March 2014 in New Delhi. Most famous novel of Khuswant Singh was Train to Pakistan, which was published in 1956. So here we have lesson the portrait of a lady. Portrait यानी कि human picture. Here lady यानी कि Khuswant Singh's grandmother. He dedicated this lesson to his grandmother. As we know, we all have grandmother at our home, but how we treat with her is depend, and it's also different from person to person. Here, notice these expressions in the text, infer their meaning from the context. It means here there are 7 words and 7 little bit sentences, and we have to see the exact meaning with the context of lesson. So let's start. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. So Khuswant Singh said that my grandmother. Definitely, whenever we have the word grandmother in our mind, there is one particular picture. Okay, grandmother यानी कि little bit aged woman and grey or white hair, little bit fatty, wrinkled face. So Khuswant Singh also said that my grandmother is also like yours. And students, before you start to understand this explanation, just go through once and read whole lesson calmly. Then you will get the exact and better idea of this lesson. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. Writer said, she यानी कि grandmother remain as it is, old and wrinkled. Wrinkle यानी कि curly skin. So writer says that from last 20 years she remained as it is. There is no change in her oldness. So here last 20 years. So we can also imagine that maybe our writer's age was around 20 or 25 that time. People say that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. Later said that people said, यानी कि the family members, relatives, neighbors, they said that once upon a time she was a beautiful and young lady. Here there is a young and pretty. Look, there is a little bit difference between beautiful and pretty. Beautiful यानी कि things which we see and said, wow, it's so beautiful. But pretty यानी कि the thing or the person or place, whatever, we like to see. And had even a husband. But narrator said that it's hard to believe that she was pretty and had also husband. Why? Because according to narrator, from last 20 years, she was as it is. There is no change in her face. Like with the time, the person turned and looked more aged. But grandmother was as it is. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. Here So we can say that grandfather was no more. So his portrait was there in the drawing room. Here metal piece. As we know, right now we have pictures, frame. In short, we are living in 21st century with the full of technology. But in around 1956 or around 1970, there wasn't much more technologies. So most of the time, people had a portrait which was sketched by the painter. So our writer's grandfather had also a portrait in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes, like typical Indian men costume, turban and loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. So here in 2 or 3 lines there is a description of grandfather. He had a long and white beard which covered his chest area and looked at least 100 years old. Look, writer had 2 different narration. First, grandmother, according to writer, she was as it is from last 20 years, and grandfather age around 100 years. He didn't look the sort of person, kind of person who would have a wife or children. The attitude of grandfather was quite different, that no one can accept that, oh, that person had a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. Why? Because as Khuswan Singh said that grandfather age was around 100 years in that portrait. So definitely our grandfather means age more than 60. So with the comparison of the picture, narrator thought that okay, grandfather has only grandchildren because he was he had an age around 100 years. As for my grandmother, being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. Here, the writer said, my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. Revolting and not accepting. Unbelievable. Now you can compare this line with the context of the lesson. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. Right now, we are in 2020. And if your grandparents are still alive, then they have age around 60. So now definitely in age of 2020, then in right condition, the games are completely different in comparing to before 60 years time. So exactly the time of grandmother, the games were completely different. So grandmother often shared her experience and games with our writer. That seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. But writer said that the games, whatever they played in that era, for us it was completely undignified and absurd, not matched with the current time. But still, we accept it. Fables of prophets, fable stories, and fable saint. So we treat that stories or that game part as that only a fairy tale type stories. We didn't take much more attention towards that. But we never hurt our grandmother and also accept whatever she said. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. So here, description of grandmother. Short, fat, slightly bent due to age. Her face was crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. Now, grandfather portrait said that he was around 100 years. So definitely grandmother was still alive that time when narrator explained this lesson. So grandmother's face was also crisscross of wrinkles, wrinkle face, running from everywhere. Running from यानी कि जैसे कि कई बार हम लोग बहुत एजेड पर्सन को देखते हैं तो क्या होता है, उनकी पूरी बॉडी जो वो स्किन होती है वो जैसे कि हैंग की हो, ऐसा दिखता है हम लोगों को. तो यहाँ पे भी बोलते हैं रनिंग फ्रॉम एवरीवेयर, यानी कि कहीं से भी नीचे की तरफ झुकी हुई है. नो, we were certain she had always been, as we had known her. Writer said that she was as it is. From the day I known her, she is still as it is. Old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. Narrator said she was old, not only old, terribly old. Why? Because she was benty also. And she could not have grown older. It means the age of grandmother was as it is. And had stayed at the same age for last 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. Writer said she was never a pretty one, but always beautiful. Beautiful by heart, beautiful by behavior. She hobbled about the house in spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and the other telling the beads of her rosary. So, here the narrator said that she hobbled about the house in spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist. Why? Because she was a bent lady. So definitely she need one hand for support. So she always put her one hand on her waist. And hobble यानी कि moving. Her stoop, balance her stoop. Stoop यानी कि she was bent, so she was balancing her body by putting her hand on her waist. And other telling the beads of her rosary. Rosary यानी कि जप माला हम लोग बोलते हैं ना, जो हाथ में माला होती है वो राम राम करने वाली. बीड्स यानी कि जो उसमें छोटे छोटे माला के मोती होते हैं, उसको बोलते हैं बीड्स. Her silver looks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Her silver looks. Why silver looks? Because she was now aged lady. Scattered untidily over her pale lightless, puckered face, dull, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Inaudible prayer यानी कि as we know, like our grandparents, most of the time whenever they are free, they are chanting the name of God, but not loudly. It means inaudible. We cannot hear it clearly. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. Narrator said, yes, my grandmother was definitely beautiful. As I told you, beautiful by words and beautiful by action. She was like the winter landscape in the mountain. It means during the winter time, the beauty, landscape यानी कि beauty of the mountains are superb. We like to visit that place again and again. So the narrator compared the beauty of grandmother with landscape of mountain. An expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Expanse of pure white serenity. Serenity यानी कि calmness. Breathing peace and contentment. Contentment यानी कि satisfaction. Whenever you meet her, whenever you talk to her, you always feel happiness, calmness, you feel peace. So, my grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. Here, the narrator, our writer and grandmother had a very good bonding. As mostly we know in our Indian family, our parents are doing job And as a child, we most of the time we spent with our grandparents. So here the same thing happened with our narrator also. He spent his most of the time with his grandmother. So they had a good bonding. When our writer's parents went to city for earning more or some other reason, most of the time our writer and grandmother spent together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. So here in this para, our writer explained and expressed grandmother and his bonding, reason of his bonding and their action, whatever they did. So grandmother used to wake writer up in the morning. Why? Definitely for schooling, and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. The narrator says, during the morning time, when grandmother was in hurry to ready me for the school, that time she do that morning prayer, monotonous way and in single way, like routine way. And why she did all this? Because she wanted that at least few words my grandchild listen and the goodness of God also grace him. And I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it. That was also too smart like you. He said, I listened that prayer because I like her voice, but I never try to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, snatch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot and a red pen. Tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. What happened? See here, first of all, that grandmother took that wooden slate. We have right now many facilities, notebooks and all this, but in around 1950 it was hardly. So they had wooden slate. Even ask your parents, they had also used it. Even your grandparents completed their schooling by this wooden slate. So what did grandmother did with that slate? First of all, she washed it before the sunlight and plastered it with yellow chalk and tiny earthen ink pot. Why? To use that for writing. And red pen. Tie them in a bundle and hand to our writer. After a breakfast of a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. So what was their breakfast? In breakfast they have thick stale chapatis, यानी कि बासी chapatis रोटी जो अगले दिन की शाम की रात की होती थी. On that she spread that little butter and sugar. Then finally they went towards the school, and grandmother was kind enough that she also carried several stale chapatis for the village dog. Okay students, thank you. We will discuss next and further lesson in next part. Thank you.